Poor girl cries alone in the rain after being humiliated. A millionaire offers her his umbrella, and what happened next became news all over the city. She trembled, soaked from head to toe, as she held her torn apron and stared at the dirty floor in front of the coffee shop where she worked. Her colleagues laughed behind her. Some recorded it with their cell phones. An important client, arrogant, rich and bored, had just deliberately dropped her order just to see how the common people react. She slowly bent down to pick up the broken china, and the manager just watched as if she were invisible. No one helped her, no one cared. Until, amidst the collective mockery, a tall man in a grey suit with a calm gaze stopped right in front of her, opened a black umbrella over her and held out his hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. Silence was immediate. The laughter ceased. But the young woman didn't respond. She just looked at the umbrella and burst into tears. The next morning, social media was abuzz. The same coffee shop where the young woman had been humiliated now had a line out the door. The video of the man offering his umbrella went viral, but with an unexpected twist. Financial experts recognized him as Nolan Graves, the billionaire founder of one of the largest technology companies on the West Coast. What no one knew was that this girl, the same one he'd supported, had a past directly linked to Nolan's empire. And she knew it. He didn't. Not yet. Until a single sentence from her, spoken days later, would bring the man to his knees in the middle of a packed auditorium. "I never needed your pity. I just wanted you to know who I am." And what happened next became citywide news. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. The city lights were still waking up as the first customers entered the coffee shop in Seattle's financial district. The wet floor reflected the skyscrapers as if the sky were upside down, and inside that elegant corner cafe, with dark wood, jazz instrumentals, and the aroma of expensive coffee, everything followed its predictable course. Men in ties hurriedly ordered their almond milk lattes, impeccably dressed women frantically tapped away on their phones, and the staff maintained mechanical smiles, learned by necessity. Among them was Ava, young, quiet, her hair tied in a hasty bun, wearing a worn uniform that didn't disguise the hand-sewn seams. She walked quickly, balancing trays, wiping tables, politely taking orders, and avoiding any mistakes as much as possible. There, she was invisible, just another server among many others. That same day, the most talked-about name among executives was Nolan Graves, a reserved billionaire newly arrived in the city after years living in Boston. A visionary, feared, and known for buying companies only to close them and destroy competitors, it was said he would choose a random coffee shop to visit before opening his new tech building in the area. Rumors ran wild, creating nervousness in every store on the block, but no one knew where he would set foot. At 8:47 a.m., a black car with tinted windows pulled up discreetly. Ava was wiping the window table when she saw a man get out with a closed umbrella in one hand. She didn't recognize him. She only noticed how clean his shoes were, even in the rain. Upon entering, the man didn't say anything, just looked around, chose a table in the corner and sat down. The manager rushed out of the kitchen, fixing her hair and apron. Ava was stopped from serving the table by a curt gesture from the boss, who seemed to know who the man was. The whispers grew louder. Ava returned to her post in silence, but fate, which doesn't follow orders, played its part. Minutes later, when another customer complained about the delay, Ava was sent to the table of the man in the suit against the manager's wishes. She approached him with a notepad. He looked up, cold, curious, analyzing. "Black coffee, no sugar," he said without emotion. She nodded, wrote it down, and turned to leave, but slipped. A distracted customer had left the floor wet, and she, already accustomed to not making mistakes, couldn't avoid the fall. The tray with the cutlery crashed to the floor, the noise interrupting the conversations, and the laughter was inevitable. Ava quickly regained her composure, bending down to gather her belongings, but the man stared at her, unhelpful, as if watching a play. When she finished gathering everything, she looked up. For the first time, they locked eyes. For a long time. He frowned slightly, as if he'd seen something familiar. But he didn't say anything. Neither did she. She simply returned to the counter. And he remained there, sipping the coffee that arrived minutes later, made by another employee. But the silence of that encounter would be only the beginning of a story that would transform not only their lives, but the perception of everyone around them. Because behind the shy waitress lay buried secrets, and behind the impenetrable man lay a past he struggled to forget. And neither of them imagined they were about to recognize each other in a way that would change everything. Ava was born on a cold November night in a public hospital in Tacoma, Washington state. Her mother, a sweet but emotionally fragile woman, named her after a biblical character who dreamed of restoring what had been destroyed. But Ava's world began to crumble too soon. Her father disappeared when she was just 3, leaving her mother with debts, diapers, and a sadness that never went away. The girl's childhood was marked by moving, nights without dinner, and promises that it will get better that never came to pass. When she turned 9, she lost her mother to a silent disease, and what was already unstable became complete helplessness. Ava was moved from shelter to shelter, from foster homes to cold homes where children were treated like numbers. She was never adopted. She grew up watching other children leave with families while she learned to make her own coffee, sew her own clothes, and hide her tears so as not to appear weak. At 15, she got her first job washing dishes at a roadside diner. Since then, she hasn't stopped. Despite everything, Ava had a resilient soul. She loved to read. She read everything she could find, from dime novels to management manuals. While reading, she came across an old copy of a business biography, the story of a man named Nolan Graves, and there, something clicked. The way he'd transformed a garage into a tech empire, how he'd conquered the world with coolness and logic. It fascinated and repelled Ava at the same time, not because he was just a billionaire, but because his name wasn't unfamiliar. She vaguely remembered that surname from whispered adult conversations in the past. Something was bothering her. At 17, she secured a partial scholarship for a technical accounting course, supporting herself at night as a cafeteria attendant. She slept little, studied hard, and even when her body cried out for rest, her mind told her it wasn't time to stop. It never was. At 20, after finishing her degree, she landed a job as an administrative assistant at a small company. She stayed there for 2 years until the company went bankrupt. Ironically, bought and shut down by a technology conglomerate. Graves. Holdings. Ava felt the blow. The name came back like a punch to the gut. But this time she didn't cry. She quit days before bankruptcy, packed up everything she owned, and moved to Seattle. There, she took a job as a waitress at the city's busiest coffee shop, not for lack of options, but because she was close to the decision-making center. She wanted to understand how the powerful moved, how the conversations unfolded, what the faces behind the acquisitions that ruined hundreds of families like hers were like. She had become a silent observer, and when Nolan Graves showed up that rainy morning, she already knew exactly who he was, only he didn't know who she was. Yet. That same week, a stupid bet was born in a conference room on the 47th floor of the glass tower of Graves Holdings. It was the kind of conversation rich men have when they're bored with their own power. "Let's see who can get a tear out of the toughest bartender in town," said one of the junior partners, laughing as he glanced out the window. Another, bolder, suggested a prize of $5,000 in aged whiskey. "There's a girl in that coffee shop on Pine Street. I've never seen her smile or stumble. Cold as a rock. Bet on her," they said amid laughter. Nolan sat silently at the head of the table, sipping strong coffee. He didn't participate in that kind of game, not ethically, but out of pure disinterest. But something about that name, Pine Street, it was the same place he'd been on Monday. The same girl who'd dropped the tray. The memory of the look in her eyes still echoed. Curiosity, perhaps, or something more. For the first time in weeks, he spoke. "I'll go." The laughter died down for a moment. "You? Nolan Graves betting with us? What's the plan? Are you going to fire the girl?" He just smirked. "Something more elegant." He left the room, leaving the others in excitement and disbelief. It was official. The most powerful man in the company had entered the bet, and the target was Ava. The next morning he returned to the coffee shop, same time, same seat, but this time he waited for her to serve him. When Ava appeared in the hallway carrying 2 cups, their eyes met. He greeted her with a barely perceptible nod. She pretended not to notice, but she did. As he approached, he complimented her. "Your balance is impressive. Last time I thought I'd fall again." She didn't respond. She just set the coffee down. "Have you always been like this?" he ventured. She looked at him coldly. "Like what?" "Strong, restrained." Ava felt something stir inside her, but she controlled it. Some learn to smile, others learn to stand. And she left. He smiled with genuine interest. It was a challenge, and he liked challenges. The next day, Nolan returned with a rose. He asked her to give it to him as a joke. When she appeared handing it to him nonchalantly, he blurted out, "Don't you like flowers?" Ava looked him straight in the eye. "Flowers wilt. I prefer roots." And she turned away. The other businessmen, watching from afar, laughed at the failed attempt. "Impossible. She's made of stone," they said. But Nolan didn't laugh. Something in him had subtly changed. The bet was no longer a game. It was becoming a quiet obsession. But Ava knew. From the beginning. She knew everything. Their 4th meeting happened without words. Nolan arrived early, before the cafe even opened. He waited outside, standing, holding a folded newspaper as a distraction, but his eyes were fixed on the reflection in the glass door waiting for her. When Ava passed through the inner hallway, adjusting her apron and tying her hair back with a broken pencil, he felt a strange anticipation in his chest, as if he were seeing not just a waitress, but a riddle that refused to be solved. She caught a glimpse of him through the window, and her step faltered for half a second. That man was still there. Again. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't routine. He didn't just want coffee. But she continued on her way as if it were just another morning, even though inside her stomach churned with memories she'd sworn to bury. When the cafe opened, Nolan was the first to enter. He chose another table, closer to her counter. This time as she approached, he looked up slowly, almost as if admiring her. "Ava, right?" She didn't confirm. "Your name is on the badge," he said softly. She nodded. "And you?" he asked, knowing full well who he was. "Nolan," she replied. "Nice to meet you." She said nothing. She just took the order. Black coffee, as always. But this time, he added, "and a glass of water. I like to cleanse my palate before tackling something bitter." The subtext was there. It was as if he were trying to flirt, but Ava remained impassive. Cold, distant. Still, he persisted. "You've always had that distant look in your eye. You seem to be somewhere else." She set the cup down and said, "Sometimes it's the only way to survive where you don't want to be." There was silence. For the first time, Nolan felt like he wasn't in control of the conversation. This woman, even young, even in her simple uniform and dark circles under her eyes, had a presence that knocked him off his feet. And that was new to him. He felt confronted, seen, challenged, and in a strange way he liked it. In the days that followed, he returned every morning. He brought books, random phrases, observations about the weather, small attempts to breach the wall she'd erected between them. Ava, for her part, remained static. Short answers, no smiles, no aggressive cuts, but also no permission for any intimacy. Nolan began to notice the details, the way she silently cleared the tables, how she didn't get distracted, even when mocked, how she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, yet walked with a straight spine, and above all, how her eyes seemed to hold an old pain, one he knew from somewhere. One night, after work, he waited for her outside, without an umbrella. The rain fell, gently, persistently, and he stood there, motionless, with the same serene expression. When she came out, surprised, she stopped in front of him and asked, "What are you waiting for me for?" He hesitated. "I wanted to see how you walk when you think no one is looking." She stared at the man for long seconds. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just said, "And what did you see?" Nolan replied with disconcerting sincerity, "Someone trying not to fall apart." And in that moment, for the first time, her gaze wavered. For a split second, her eyes welled up, but she blinked, turned, and walked away. He stood there, feeling something new, a kind of guilt he didn't understand, a feeling that this girl knew him better than he'd like. And Ava, as she walked in the rain, whispered to herself, "You have no idea what you've already destroyed in my life." The next morning dawned with the sky shrouded in heavy clouds, as if the weather itself sensed what was about to happen. It was a busy Friday, and the cafeteria was packed. Executives rushing to meetings, tourists seeking shelter from the rain, and employees jostling one another in a chaos disguised as routine. Ava, as always, did her work silently, invisibly, and efficiently, without losing her composure, even though her tired body was crying out for rest. Nolan arrived at 8:12 a.m. Wearing an impeccable navy suit, he brought two of the firm's partners and a photographer with him, under the pretense of capturing candid moments for a corporate article. But there was something underlying the visit, a tension in the air, a plan being executed with ruthless precision. As Ava waited on a table near the entrance, Nolan stood up and, with a theatrical gesture, intentionally spilled his own coffee onto the freshly cleaned floor. The liquid dripped down the dark wood, like a growing stain of shame. Everyone stared. Ava turned, saw the damage, and, before even hearing any instructions, went to get the rag and dustpan. As she bent down, she heard Nolan's voice loud and clear. "That's what happens when you employ untrained people. The service level drops." The businessman's laughter echoed through the coffee shop. One of them was recording with her cell phone. Ava, kneeling on the floor, took a deep breath. The hand holding the cloth trembled, but she refused to react. When she tried to stand, the manager appeared. "Apologize to you, sir. Now." She looked around at everyone, at Nolan, at the manager, at the cell. Phones recording, and with a shaky voice, almost a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry." But it wasn't a plea. It was an echo of past humiliations, a sound that came out clipped, dry, as if wrenched out by force. It was then that Nolan, smiling with his arms crossed, made a point of adding, "People need to learn to take their place, and yours is not among us." The silence that followed was awkward. The customers looked at each other uncomfortably. Ava remained standing, motionless, her eyes welling up. Inside she was burning, but outwardly she maintained her dignity. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She simply turned, walked to the counter, removed her apron with ceremonial slowness, and placed it on the counter. Before she walked out the door, drenched by the rain that was beginning to fall outside, she turned for a moment and looked into Nolan's eyes. His gaze was steady, direct, intense. It seemed to say 1,000 things without a single word. Then he turned and disappeared down the EE street without an umbrella, without a coat, and without ever lowering his head. Some customers began to murmur. A man immediately left the cafe. A woman closed her cell phone. The manager, flushed with embarrassment, tried to hide it. But Nolan simply returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something he didn't yet understand. But something that was about to confront him with a past he'd thought he'd forgotten. Because Ava wasn't just any waitress. She was the mirror that would one day force him to see himself. Ava didn't cry in the rain, at least not visibly. She walked to the end of the block with her hair plastered to her face, her arms crossed, and her heart aflame. The humiliation that day wasn't just another one among many. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, the breaking point. But contrary to what Nolan thought, contrary to what everyone there imagined, she hadn't been surprised. That scene, that phrase, that kind of contempt. Ava had known them all, since she was a child. She arrived home, a small rented room in the back of an old house, where she lived with stacked books, old letters, and a single framed portrait. A photo of her mother with a man in a suit holding a newborn baby. The man's face was partially obscured by shadow, but she knew very well who it was. For years, she had tried to confirm it. She had searched archives, cross-referenced dates and documents, until she discovered, months earlier, that Nolan Graves, the same man who today made her kneel on a wet floor in front of laughing executives, had been a partner in a pharmaceutical company that operated at the time her mother worked as a janitor in the central laboratory. And there was more. Much more. Her mother, Clara Evans, had been fired after reporting the improper disposal of chemicals that were affecting employees' health. Ava was still a child, but she had heard the whispers. She had seen the looks of fear. She knew her mother wasn't lying. The dismissal ruined their lives. Without proof, without support, Clara sank into depression, and months later she fell ill. A silent, fast-moving cancer. The investigations were hushed up. Nolan's name appeared in some board minutes, but disappeared from official reports. Ava grew up with this hole inside her, a mixture of helplessness, indignation, and doubt. Was it really him? The same man from the blurred photo? The same name on the records? She needed confirmation. And when he showed up at the coffee shop for the first time, her world froze. She knew in that instant it was him. The man her mother once faced alone. The dark face of the power that destroyed her childhood. But Ava didn't run, didn't flee. She chose to stay, to wait, to watch. And when the bet began, because yes, she knew the bet, Ava decided to play the game. She had heard laughter in the back room. One of the businessmen, Graves Holdings, she'd spoken too loudly into the phone. She's going to break down, I bet you. 50, she cries, in 2 days. And in that moment, Ava didn't feel afraid. She felt calm. The same calm that only those who have been crushed so many times learn to carry. When Nolan started coming back every day, trying to be kind, trying to break her silence, she already knew what was behind it. Every flower, every question, every attempt at contact was just a cover for control, for ego, for the dirty game men like him like to play. But Ava didn't react. Didn't explode, because she knew. Something he didn't. She knew that sometimes the best punch is silence. So on that day of public humiliation, when he exposed her in front of everyone, Ava didn't feel defeated. He felt it was the right moment, the final piece of the puzzle. And she was ready, not to break down, but to fight back. Not with screams or revenge, but with the truth. Because what Nolan didn't know yet, but was about to find out, was that the girl he'd knocked to the ground had known him for much longer than he'd realized. That same night, Nolan arrived at his penthouse apartment with an uneasy feeling in his chest. It was as if something was out of place, as if the image he projected had been touched by a shadow he couldn't name. He poured a whiskey, turned on the television, but nothing held his attention. He grabbed his phone, opened his photo gallery, and scrolled through the images he'd taken earlier. The coffee, the table, the fake smiles of his colleagues, and finally, Ava, kneeling on the floor, picking up the china, her eyes fixed on nothing. Suddenly, it didn't seem funny anymore. It seemed dirty, violent, small. That's when his personal assistant called. "Mr. Graves, we have a problem. An image has been leaked. The waitress. She was identified in groups of former employees of Medtrix Labs, the subsidiary your holding company acquired in 2007. Nolan frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Sir, her full name is Ava Evans." Silence. Nolan repeated the name quietly. Evans. That last name, Clara Evans. He vaguely remembered the woman. She was young, determined, stubborn. She worked in the cleaning department, but she organized a petition against the new chemical disposal protocols. At the time, management had to restrain her. He didn't personally handle the matter, but he authorized the termination, advised by the legal department. It all seemed formal, cold, logical. But now, more than a decade later, here was her daughter, the girl he'd humiliated in front of, an indifferent audience. Nolan stood up suddenly. He went to his office and rummaged through old files. He found minutes, contracts, reports, photos from the time. In one of them, a newspaper clipping showing Clara holding a sign protesting at the door of the former Medtrix headquarters. Beside her, a little girl with braids and watchful eyes. It was her, Ava, Realization hit him like a hammer. The waitress he'd bet on making cry was the daughter of the woman he'd authorized to destroy. And, what's more, she knew. She'd known all along. The pieces began to fall into place. The silence, the glances, the enigmatic phrases, the firmness with which she stood, even as the target of jokes and scorn. She wasn't fragile. She was patient. The next day, Nolan didn't show up at the coffee shop, nor the day after. He spent days locked away among his papers, watching and re-watching the videos circulating online. In one, a random customer had captured the exact moment Ava looked at him, her face wet from the rain and coffee, and said, "I'm sorry." But in that look there was something profound, something Nolan now recognized, dignity, and a pain he himself had nurtured. He felt ashamed, for the first time in many years. A shame that cut through his reputation, his billions, his business trophies. No acquisition, no number could free him from what he felt now. And while he delved into the past, trying to understand where the story was going, Ava disappeared. She'd left the rented room, left her cell phone behind, and vanished like a breeze that refuses to be trapped. But her name was starting to appear in places Nolan never imagined: forums, groups of former employees, articles by former investigative journalists. Someone was digging into the past, and the truth he'd always controlled was about to come to light. The days passed like a thick fog, and the city continued its hurried routine as if nothing had happened. But for Nolan, time had changed its texture. Each morning, without Ava, was a reminder of the failure he could no longer sweep under the rug. He returned to the coffee shop every day at the same time, sat at the same table, and watched the empty chair where she used to pause for a moment between trays. But she didn't return. He discreetly asked the manager, who said only that Ava had resigned without explanation. No phone number, no email. She simply left her apron and left. Nolan tried to hide his unease, but the days without an answer were eating away at him. He hired a private investigator, someone he trusted completely. He wanted to know where she was. He needed to see her. He needed to understand. The report came in less than a week later. Ava had disappeared from Seattle. She'd left the city with no clear destination. She'd used cash. There were no records of plane tickets or hotel reservations. But the investigator found some intriguing evidence. A visit to the registry office, where Ava retrieved a certified copy of her mother's death certificate. She also accessed old Medtrix Labs files. Nolan understood. She was digging, but why? What did she want anyway? Meanwhile, on social media, the video of Ava's humiliation gained increasing visibility. An anonymous user shared excerpts of the video, along with a provocative caption, "The man who took everything from his mother now steps on his daughter." The internet reacted within seconds, thousands of shares, furious comments. Labor rights groups began mentioning the case in manifestos. The story was taking shape. Nolan saw his reputation begin to crack. Articles began to circulate asking questions he didn't want to answer. Who was Clara Evans? Why was Medtrix really shut down? Nolan Graves's silence about the coffee girl, guilt or arrogance? And in the midst of it all, the void. The void left by Ava was like a living absence, following him wherever he went. He began to walk slower. He stopped attending meetings. He forgot his speeches. He slept poorly. When he finally found the courage to open the old folder with photos from his first company, he found a forgotten image in the background, an internal event years ago. Clara Evans in the background, holding a girl with braids and notebooks. The same one who now disappeared from his days, but invaded his thoughts like a constant march. One early morning, rainy as the one when it all began, Nolan walked alone through the streets of Seattle. No bodyguards, no driver, no umbrella. He stopped in front of the empty coffee shop, leaned his forehead against the wet glass and stood there motionless. He knew she wasn't there. He knew he might never see her again. But it was too late to stop something inside him from moving. The first stories emerged tentatively. A footnote on a local investigative blog, The truth behind the waitress humiliated by Nolan Graves may be linked to old Medtrix Labs allegations. Few noticed, but all it took was one influencer reposting a video analysis for the storm to begin. Within hours, Ava's videos were retrieved, dissected and expanded. The scene of her on her knees, Nolan's voice saying, "You don't belong with us," the manager demanding an apology. It was all there, in high definition, in slow motion, with millions of views. But what really went viral was the context. She was the daughter of Clara Evans, the woman who tried to expose Nolan Graves in the early 2000s. The narrative caught fire. TV shows revisited the case. Environmental law experts, former employees of the former Medtrix, journalists who had been silenced at the time. Everyone came forward. Each new testimony revealed a layer of corporate filth that society had ignored for years, and whose epicenter had a name, surname, and a cold face stamped on glass buildings. On social media, the hashtag Justice Forever surpassed the million mark in less than 3 days. Petitions were created demanding a federal investigation into the company's past dealings. Graves Holdings Universities suspended invitations to lectures with Nolan. Investors began to pull back. The stock market felt the impact. In a hastily arranged press conference, spokespersons tried to contain the damage. They said that Mr. Graves deeply regrets what happened, that operations at the time complied with current regulations, and that action is being taken internally. But no one believed them. The coldness of the text read by an aide only worsened public perception. Meanwhile, Ava's image, silent, wet, humiliated standing, became a symbol of an ignored class, of daughters and sons of women destroyed by ruthless systems, of all who learned to survive where they were not welcome. And Nolan was starting to crumble. He tried to remain rational. He tried to argue with his board, with investors, with journalists, but every word he said was met with venom. Within days, he was removed from the presidency, Graves Holdings. His name was removed from the building he himself financed. The social judgment was relentless. An editorial in the Seattle Tribune said, "Nolan Graves' real downfall wasn't corporate, it was human." And deep down, he knew it was true. Because what hurt Nolan wasn't the scandal, nor the loss of prestige. It was her absence. Ava, her face silent and strong, had become a mirror that haunted him. And no matter how much I tried to forget, it was too late. The only thing he wanted now was to find her. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden flash, nor a romantic epiphany. It was a slow, silent erosion like rain carving away stone. In the first days after his downfall, Nolan tried to react as he always had, with control, strategy, and rationality. He sought out crisis advisors, hired the best lawyers, tried to shift assets, clear his name. But none of it worked. Because this time it wasn't just about reputation, it was about truth, and that he couldn't manipulate. He began to withdraw from everything. He cancelled appointments, sold properties, turned off his cell phones. He fired his entire media team and asked to no longer be called Mr. Graves. He retreated to his childhood home in rural Oregon, a place he hadn't visited in over 20 years. There, among ancient walls and profound silences, he found himself again, or at least what was left of it. He began rereading old notebooks, letters from his deceased mother, diaries he'd never finished. He remembered how it all began. The brilliant, ambitious boy who wanted to change the world, but who learned early on that to win was to crush. That kindness was weakness, that empathy was backwardness. And he realized that, on the path to the top, he'd abandoned everything that made him human. In the middle of the night one morning, he woke up gasping after a strange dream. Ava standing before him, staring silently, not angry, but disappointed. Just disappointed. And it destroyed him. It was then that he began to do something he never imagined. He spent days alone rebuilding what he had destroyed. Not with money, but with action. He sought out former Medtrix employees one by one. He apologized, listened to their stories, cried during some calls. He financed the treatment of one of them, helped rebuild the community daycare center that Clara Evans attended with her daughter, and quietly signed a compensation fund for all workers affected by the arbitrary layoffs of the time. No one knew about these acts. He forbade them from being publicized. He wanted to do it, not be seen doing it. The last step was the hardest, visiting Clara's grave. He went alone. He brought flowers, but said nothing before the headstone. He simply knelt, took off his coat, and stood there, motionless, for over an hour. Then he left an envelope there. Inside was a letter, the only one he had written by hand in the last 20 years, asking for forgiveness, for his omission, for his arrogance, for silencing a woman who only wanted justice. But no matter. What he did, there was something that no amount of action could give back. Ava's trust. And that's what hurt. Nolan didn't want to clear his name. He wanted to cleanse his soul, and deep down, he harbored only one hope, that somewhere, Ava knew how much he was changing. Not to be forgiven, but to be worthy of deserving a reunion. The reunion didn't happen amidst applause, nor in front of cameras. There was no audience, nor soundtrack. It happened where truths are born, in silence. It was a grey afternoon in Portland. Nolan was in a small community library in the neighborhood where Ava had last been seen, leafing through a book on environmental history she often cited from the old archives. The librarian, a gentleman with a husky voice and a kind gaze, discreetly recognized him. "There's someone here you might want to see," he said, with the wisdom of someone who had seen many regrets pass through life. He pointed to the back of the room, between forgotten bookshelves, where a young woman was sorting through stacks of old papers and records, her expression serene but focused. It was Ava. Nolan felt his heart skip a beat. Time stood still. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't the wet waitress from the cafeteria anymore. She wore a simple grey blouse, her hair loose, her face clean, and an expression that blended peace and scars. He approached slowly, as if stepping into a minefield. When she looked up and saw him, she wasn't startled. She just stared. For a long time. As if she'd known he'd show up one day. They said nothing for several seconds. They just breathed the same air, heavy with memories. Nolan finally spoke, his voice hoarse and choked. "I've been looking for you." Ava studied him, searching for cracks in his voice, his eyes, his posture. Then she replied calmly, "I wasn't hiding. I just didn't want to be found by anyone who didn't know who I was." Nolan looked down. "Now I know, and yet, I don't know how to fix it." "You don't repair the past," she said, calmly. "You honor the present, and you take care of what can still be saved." He nodded, without forcing words. She gestured for him to sit across from her. They talked there for hours, about everything, about Clara, about what she'd been through, about what he'd ignored, about the lives lost between the lines of contracts and logical decisions. Ava didn't shout. She didn't demand anything. She didn't want money, nor public requests. She wanted truth, and that day, she saw truth in him. She saw a man stripped of his pride, willing to learn to feel. When the library announced its closure, the two stood up. Nolan hesitantly said, "If you ever want, I can show you the foundations I'm building in your mother's name." She simply replied, "I already know." And she smiled. A small smile, which lasted only a short time, but remained forever. They left together, without touching, without promises, without a clear future. They simply shared the same path for a few blocks in silence. And that was enough. Because in that reunion there were no endings, there were bridges, and for the first time Nolan walked on something he didn't build, but that could ultimately sustain them both. The following days passed like a thin thread between two worlds, the old and the new. Nolan didn't try to force contact. He didn't pressure her with messages, nor surround her with grand gestures. He knew that any attempt at control, even disguised as attention, would be just another repetition of the pattern that had driven him away from everything that mattered. So he waited. Ava, on the other hand, didn't run away either. She didn't block him. She didn't disappear. She watched. From afar, from close up, from within. She no longer saw him as the monster of the past, but she wasn't willing to forget the pain either. Her heart wasn't a tribunal, but it wasn't a refuge either. She needed time, not to understand him, but to decide who she would become now that he knew the truth. It was a Saturday afternoon, weeks after their reunion at the library, that she decided to seek him out. Nolan was alone, tending the garden of his mother's old house. When he saw Ava walk through the wooden gate, his breath caught. I couldn't tell if it was forgiveness, goodbye, or a sentence. He simply dropped the shovel on the ground, wiped his hands on his pants, and waited for her. She walked toward him, her steps calm and steady. She stopped a few feet away and looked around. The garden was well tended, new roses, ancient trees, carefully pruned. It was as if he were trying to reconstruct something without words, and that was exactly what he was. "You changed the place," Ava said. He nodded. "I couldn't change the past, so I started with the floor." She looked at his hands covered in dirt. For the first time, they didn't look like the hands of a man above the world. They looked like the hands of someone digging, planting, bleeding. "I thought long and hard about what I would say to you," she continued, "but I realized the answer was already ready before I even arrived." Nolan held his breath. She looked at him deeply, her eyes calm and decisive. "I won't hate you, Nolan, because hate would be staying stuck with you, and my life is bigger than your guilt." He closed his eyes for a second, swallowing the impact. "But I won't forget either, because my mother's memory doesn't deserve to be erased to make you feel better." He nodded silently. Ava stepped forward. "You asked me for forgiveness, but true forgiveness isn't a gift you receive, it's a road you walk." "I'm trying to walk," he muttered. "Then go on," she replied, "with or without my eyes on you." And then gently she extended her hand, not in farewell, but in surrender. Nolan took it, not tightly, respectfully. Ava smiled, a sad, beautiful, powerful smile. He turned, walked across the garden, through the gate, and continued on his way. No promises, no forced reconciliations, no canned happy endings. She had chosen not to erase, not to destroy, but to move on. And that was the most liberating gesture that could exist. The afternoon was falling in golden hues when Nolan, alone, re-entered the Pine Street coffee shop. The place was different, renovated, a new counter, softer lights, different management. But one thing remained, the corner table, where it all began. He sat there, silent, without a cell phone, without an escort, without haste. The waitress approached, young and kind, not recognizing him. "Black coffee, no sugar?" she asked with a smile. He smiled back, almost embarrassed at the memory. "Yes, please." While he waited, he pulled a small beige envelope, worn around the edges, from his pocket. He placed it on the table next to his empty cup. Inside was a single folded sheet, an old photo of Clara Evans holding Ava in her arms before the Medtrix gates. On the back was a handwritten sentence: "It is never too late to plant what was once uprooted." Nolan didn't drink the coffee. He simply left the money he paid in cash, got up and walked out. Across the street, unnoticed, Ava watched from afar. She was wearing a coat and leaning against a used book stand. Her eyes lingered on the empty table for a few seconds. Then she turned, walked to the other side of town, and disappeared among the anonymous crowd. At the back of the counter, the attendant opened the envelope out of curiosity. She saw the photo, read the phrase. She smiled. She didn't understand what it meant. But she felt something beautiful. And just like that, no announcements, no explained ending, no epic score, the story ended. Or maybe it just started again. In silence. Where the greatest revolutions always begin. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. So tell me in the comments, would you forgive in her place? Or would you say goodbye forever? I really want to know what you would do. Take advantage of this moment. Leave your like if this story touched. You subscribe to the channels so as not to miss any of the next ones, because they are even more intense. And click on the video that's appearing on your screen now. It tells another moving story, with a twist that will give you goosebumps. I'll wait for you.